All right, so like I was saying, at University Growth Fund, the students are the focus. And so what ultimately that means is the students really drive the investment process. Instead of getting my coffee, my job is to get your coffee at the fund, if you will. And so students do all the due diligence in our deals. They get to play a key role in making the investment decision by voting on every deal that we do. And then post-investment, they roll up their sleeves and help our portfolio companies. The other thing that's unique is this isn't like a one semester internship. Rather, we bring students in for a semester. If they perform well, we promote them to an associate, and we hope they stay with us until they graduate. And we provide scholarships and other things to help them along. But really, the goal is to give them as much experience and exposure as possible while they're in college, because what we found is that it yields tremendous benefits on the back end, the more experience you can get. The other thing that makes our program unique is you're investing real money. And so when you meet with an entrepreneur, like the level of respect they have for you and the level at which they engage with you is just much, much deeper than it would be if you were doing like an informational interview or they came and spoke to your class or what have you. And that's really where kind of the core learning really happens. And then we do a lot of things to support that through our training programs or our mentorship program, through networking opportunities, trips, placement, all kinds of fun stuff like that. So if that's interesting, feel free to check out our website. We'll be doing information sessions with a lot more details in the future. But if you already know, hey, that sounds super interesting, go ahead and you can apply now through our website. And resumes are roughly due March 6th. That'll probably extend out another week after that. So no massive rush. All right, so let's jump into the competition. Hopefully that was a helpful context on who we are. So for this competition, we're excited to be partnering with OHUB and Ally Bank, who are helping sponsor this competition. They're awesome, and they do a lot of great things, and so we're very grateful and humbled to be partnered with them on bringing this competition to all of you. So let's talk about like what is venture capital, and really this question is at the heart of why we're doing this competition. So it's kind of relevant. You know, I think a lot of people look at venture capital and they watch Shark Tank and think like, hey, maybe that's what venture capital is, right? It's a bunch of these investors and they sit in their fancy seats and then they berate the entrepreneurs and you know, they write $100,000 or $500,000, whatever it is, investments into these companies, and that's what it is. And well, I think Shark Tank is great entertainment and a lot of fun. It's not really venture capital. If a great entrepreneur went on this show and was treated the way some of these guys and women treat the entrepreneurs, they would walk out, and those investors would miss out on some of the most impressive, amazing opportunities. And so as we looked at this, we were like, hey, look, we think that there's a lot of misconceptions about what venture capital is. The other thing that we've heard a lot is people believe it's just hardcore finance. If you're not a finance Excel jock, you're just not going to make it in venture capital. And we don't think that's true either. There's a lot around people and relationships and strategy and predicting the future and all these other things that play a role in it as well. And so, you know, we decided to launch this competition really as a way to teach students what venture capital is, so that they could figure out if this was a general career path that they wanted to pursue. So what is venture capital then? Well, at its core, it's investments in small companies that have the potential to become huge companies. And I don't just mean big companies, but huge companies, right? So you think about Larry and Sergey at Google. Back when it was, you know, they're two students at Stanford, they're literally working out of a garage to build a search engine at a time when there were like 20 other search engines that had raised venture money. And the internet was just getting going, right? And you can see like their original web page there. And so as an investor, right, you look at this and you got to think about, this is like just crazy idea, right? Really small company, who knows? But could this get really, really big? And are these the guys to pull it off? right? So in this case, right, Google, a lot of investors were investing in search because they knew that as the internet took off, it was just going to be all of this information. And how do you manage all of that information? How do you categorize it, sort it, search it, organize it, what have you? And that search would be a critical part of that. And so there were a lot of people that were launching different types of search engines. What Larry and Sergey did that was really interesting is they figured out a way to do search better than anybody else. And that ultimately is what allowed them to win in the long run, right? Is because their product in this particular case was just so much better than anyone else. And investors that put in $100,000 into their very early rounds ended up that $100,000 ended up being worth over $1 billion by the time they went public. And today, where the company is like $1 trillion company, that same position's probably worth over $10 billion today. So it's, the scale of that is just crazy, right? You put in 100,000 and you get $1 billion back. Is crazy, but that's the type of things that we're really looking for as venture investors. And we'll explain a little bit more why it's usually that's the case. So what makes a good VC? And I think this is important to anybody that wants to work in VC or wants to understand it. The first thing is you've got to be able to identify like what's the next big thing. So if you think about Google, right? Everybody knew and could see the internet and was super excited about it. And then it was like, okay, the internet's the next big thing. What are they going to be the things that are going to be really important along with that? And search is definitely one of them, right? Like we talked about. So one is what's the next big thing? Because you got to get in before anybody else has kind of figured it out, right? And then once you figure out what the next big thing is, you got to find the company that will win in the space. So like I said, there were like 20 different companies that were all doing search at the time that Google launched. And so it wasn't enough just to know that search was important. You had to find Google, because today, how many other search engines are there really, right? I mean, there's kind of sort of Bing, but I mean, I don't use Bing. I don't know anybody else that really uses Bing. And it's really like Google today. What's interesting is search is shifting a little bit so that you could actually argue that YouTube and Amazon are quickly becoming major search engine threats to Google. But even so, today, Google is probably at the forefront. The next is, just because you know what the next big thing is and you find the company that you think will win, you got to be able to get access to that deal in order to make an investment. And that's what I was getting at in the very beginning when I talked about Shark Tank, is that the very best deals, everybody's fighting over each other to get into those deals, right? And sometimes you see that dynamic happening even on Shark Tank, right? Where they're all trying to outcompete each other. And that's really the case, right? It's hard to get access to great companies because the entrepreneur can kind of decide who they want to let in and who they don't. And then the last is, and this is probably the least important, although VCs will always say it's the most important, is helping the company succeed, right? So a lot of VCs like take board seats and they make introductions and they help with strategy and opening up relationships with potential hires and customers and so on and so forth. And that's an important part. Ultimately, though, what most VCs do is they tout their ability to help a company succeed in order to get that company to let them invest. But anyway, so those are the 4 things you got to do. And in this competition, we are going to focus on helping you develop the ability to do the first 3. That's really the goal of this competition, which, if you think about it, like that is the meat of being a VC. All right, so that is the objective of the competition: to find, diligence, and commit and convince your partners to invest in the next great startup. Your partners in this case are the judges or the investment committee at the end, but they will act as though they are your partners in your fund, and your job is to convince them that the deal that you have sourced and perform due diligence on is a real winner and that they should invest. All right, so some quick rules. Teams, 2 to 4 people, any combination of school, stage and school, etc. Any sort of background, everybody is invited to participate in the Atlanta metro area. So if you've got friends you think might find this interesting or just want to listen in and learn, they're highly encouraged to participate, even if they don't want to compete. Everything is open. Again, we are very much an education focused firm, and so we want to provide as much education and opportunity as possible to as many students and those that are interested as possible. The next thing is, as part of this competition, you're going to have to go out and find a deal, and you can source that deal from anywhere. We don't care where it comes from. The only things that we do care about is that it has to be current. So you can't say, oh, well, I would have invested in YouTube, and let me tell you why it was a great investment, 20 years ago. That's not going to work. It's got to be a deal where they're currently raising money, and you have to be able to get access to that deal. And the way that we're going to measure that is your ability to get access to some sort of financial or other performance metrics, knowing that the information is not going to be held confidential, right? So it's going to be a little bit of a lift in terms of, finding an interesting deal and convincing an entrepreneur to work with you on that. But we've got solutions there too, and we'll help you find those opportunities. The next is attendance is not required at the workshops. We are recording these. We'll post them on our website. You can watch them at 2x speed or what have you. But we do highly encourage you to come to the workshops. And part of the reason for that is that we're going to do a lot of Q&A. We're going to reserve time after the presentation to do breakout rooms with teams and some of our student associates to give feedback and guidance and mentorship. Our goal is to give you everything you need in order to win. And we've historically, pretty much every year, have had freshman teams come compete and place in the top 3. So don't think like, oh, I don't have any experience, I can't win this. Guaranteed most of the people in the competition don't have any experience either, not in venture capital. And so we're going to do everything we can to give you the skill set to win here. All you have to do is put in the time and the effort. The last bullet point is, and we'll talk about this more, but assume that you have a $50 million seed fund and that you are going to invest accordingly. So what I mean by that is you're probably not going to go chasing after a pre-IPO company, because that wouldn't really work for your seed fund. And we'll explain a little bit more why that may or may not be the case. Okay, these dates are on the website, so go ahead and check them out. The main things that I just want to hit on here is that next week we'll do a deeper dive into deal sourcing and screening deals. And then March 6th is the deadline to sign up. So yeah, make sure that you and your teams have signed up by March 6th. And then lastly, prizes. So every team that signs up will be paired with a UGF associate, somebody that's been at our fund for a couple semesters as a mentor and there to kind of give feedback and coaching and help them out. So everybody gets kind of some support there. The top 5 teams, we're going to pair with an associate or an analyst at a local venture fund. And so you'll have the opportunity to engage with that individual and learn from them, and they will give you feedback on your pitch to help you prep it for the final event. And then we have, of course, cash prizes for the top 3 teams, 3,000, 2,000, 1,000. All the workshops were recorded and posted to the web, as I mentioned. And then, of course, like I said earlier, every event is open to everyone. And we encourage people to come and join us and learn. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so let's dive into some training. We're ready for that. Let me just see. I closed my chat window. Let me just double check and make sure there are no questions. Okay, great. If you've got any, feel free to throw them in the chat. My lovely assistants, Christy and Rocky, are happy to answer those in real time. Plus, I'll keep an eye on them as well. All right, so VC fund economics. So the first thing you have to learn about venture capital is probably this chart right here. And what's going on here is a lot of people think that venture investing follows a bell curve, right? So we're all familiar with bell curves. The person in the middle, right? Like average height, right? The average is right in the middle of that bell curve, and there's a lot of people that fall in the average, and then there's fewer people that are a little taller, a little shorter, and so on and so forth, all the way out to the extremes. And then you have people that are really, really short, and you have people who are really, really tall, right? But they're at the extremes. But for the most part, like everybody kind of fits within this general middle part, right? That is not how venture capital profits or the return on investment works in VC. Instead, it follows what's called the power law distribution. And power law follows this 80-20 rule. You've probably heard of that before. That 80% of the profits or the returns generated in venture capital will come from 20% of the companies. And it gets even worse from there. It's like there's one company in any given year that will generate a massive percentage of the overall profits of a company that year. So think about just this last year, Airbnb went public, right? Today, they're valued at about $100 billion, which is crazy. If you look at all of the venture deals that were funded the same year that Airbnb launched, right? There's going to be a huge delta between Airbnb and the next closest company, right? And that's the case with power law. There's just a few deals in any given year that are going to generate a massive amount of return. And then the next one returns a lot more, but it's a lot less than the prior one, and so on and so on and so on. Just to illustrate it even further, this is a chart of the top 100 US backed or venture backed exits since 2009. And you can see how it falls. These are individual deals. So each line on that is one deal, right? In terms of its valuation at time of exit. So you can see like Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the top venture funds in the world. He makes the point like there are only a handful of deals in any given year that matter. And your job as a VC is to make sure you get in to one of those handful of deals, if that makes sense. Because if this is true, yeah, right, you got to be in that one deal. And if you are, you generate just massive, massive returns for you and your investors. I think the fund Excel that invested in Facebook, the rumors that I've heard is that they returned like 200 times their fund on because of that one deal. Which is crazy because it's not like they invested their whole fund into Facebook, right? They invested part of their fund into Facebook and then the rest of it in a whole bunch of other companies, and still generated just a massive, massive home run on Facebook alone. Okay, so let's talk about what that means if you're a fund, right? So let's assume that you have $100 million fund. I'm going to make you guys do a little bit of math here. And you make 10 investments of $10 million each in that fund. If you kind of walk through the way the power law distribution works, you'll have like 2 investments that return somewhere between 2 and 3 times your investment. You'll have 3 investments that return your investment. So you just get your money back, no profits, just get your money back. And then 4 that are just a total complete loss. You lose everything. Question then is, how much does your number one winner need to return in order for you to have a quote unquote successful venture fund in the industry? What do you guys think it is? Throw them in the chat. Anybody? Any guesses? So I'll help you work through the math a little bit here. So let's assume that well, let's work through the math, right? So I put in $10 million into 10 deals. So two of them, let's be generous and say I returned 30 million on each of those two. So I got $60 million. And then I've got another deal, those other three that give me my money back. So now I'm at $90 million of value kind of that I can send back to my investors. And these other four are losses. So I invested 100 million and now I've got 90 million. How much do I need that one winner to generate? I'm already in the hole, right? People probably not going to invest if I invest $100 million and hand them back $90, right? So, okay, so I'm seeing 10x, 10, 2 to 3x. Any other guesses? These are good guesses. 1 to 2x. Well, if I get a 1 or 2x, then right, I'm going to get $1 million or $10 million, and I'll basically, I borrowed or I invested 100 and I gave back 100. That's probably not going to get people too excited. Okay, 5x. If I do 5x, that means I'm going to invest 100 and I'm going to give back 140 million. So that's not so bad, right? 40% ROI, it's not bad. Except these investments, they take a long time. So to be realized, like 10 years in some cases. So, getting a 40% gain over 10 years is probably not too exciting for your investors. A bunch of you said 10x. So let's talk about 10x. So if I get 10x, that means that one investment will return $100 million, right? That's pretty awesome. So now I'm going to return $190 million. Let me ask you this. Over the course of 10 years, if you gave me $1 and I gave you $1.90 after 10 years, would you be excited about that? Probably not, right? So it turns out that rule of thumb generally is 10x, but it's probably at least 10x. Or in other words, it probably needs to be closer to 20x. And in some cases for early stage seed funds, it should be closer to 20, 30, 40, 50x potential, right? And so if all of your investments, part of the reason why you're going to have 4 complete losses is because you can't afford to make investments that only return 2 to 3x. You need because what if your winner only returns 3x and you needed it to return 10, right? So you end up having to invest in companies where every company has a chance to return 10x or 20x or whatever is needed, which means that these businesses are very risky. But when it plays out, it can play out huge. So there's a story. Well, it's not a story. It's something that really happened. There's an investor named Ron Conway. You should look him up if you haven't heard of him. He's a great guy. So he is considered the godfather of angel investing in Silicon Valley. He started one of the very first angel funds back in the 90s and started placing bets. And he made 50 investments out of that fund. And he lost money, I believe, on 49 of them. But the 50th one was Google. And he made such a huge return on Google that it paid back all of his prior investments, made up for them, and generated a very, very healthy return for his investors, which allowed him to raise another fund and another fund. And he became an early stage investor in Facebook and Pinterest and a bunch of other great household names today. And then in that case, Google returned 1,000x for its investors. Now, look, you don't have to find, as part of this competition, you don't have to find the next Google or Facebook. There's a lot of other great companies that you can invest in that, you don't need 1,000x. You would be happy if you got 20x or 10x even, right? In order to make the math pencil. But these are the things you got to be thinking about. So what does that mean in terms of the deals you're looking at? You need to find a company that can become a monopoly and scale very fast. Okay, so why does it have to be a monopoly? The reason it needs to be a monopoly, like Google is a monopoly, Facebook's a monopoly, Apple's a monopoly, right? These are all monopoly companies. is because if you're a monopoly, you tend to have better profits than everybody else. You can charge more. You can't charge whatever you want, but you can charge more than others, especially if you don't have any competition, right? So you want to look for companies that can become a monopoly. And we're going to spend some time next week talking about different ways to identify whether or not a company has that potential. And then it also, being a monopoly is not enough. It also has to scale very fast and get very big, right? And so that's why you see most venture capitalists invest in things like software, because you don't have to create a whole new software product every time you sell it to a new customer, like you would like a widget, right? Or a consumer product. You just write it once and then you just sell access to that software, right? It scales very, very fast and efficiently. All right, so as you're starting to think about like what kind of deals are going to be interesting, what kind of stuff should I go after? These are some of the questions you should ask yourself. First of all, can it scale super fast like software, right? Can it grow really fast without having to raise a lot of money every time they want to sell one more unit? Do they have a really strong team? Or in other words, like, do they have a great leader that's super charismatic, like an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, or Jack Dorsey, one of these really great leaders? Or do they have really unique experience that gives them insight into this industry and the pain point that's being solved? Does it operate in a huge potential market? And I said potential on purpose. Potential in that, like, maybe the market's not very big today, but someday it could be really big. So the classic example here, right, is a company like Airbnb, right, where when they launched, there weren't a lot of people sleeping on others' couches, right? But their market was really this whole hospitality side of the industry and market. And so they had the opportunity to really grow into that, even though the market, when they for sleeping on people's couch or renting out a room in your house, was really, really small. But it needs to be big because you need this company to scale and grow to be very big. And so the underlying market has to be big enough to support that. It has to have what we call unfair advantages over competitors. Example of this might be network effects. So think about how hard it is to launch a competitor to Facebook today, right? You can look at Facebook and you're like, I could build something better than Facebook. It's not that hard. Like, Facebook is like, it's an old product. Like, we could do better. But the problem is that everybody is on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, or not TikTok, WhatsApp, right? And because everybody's on it, like, that's the real value, is everyone's there already, right? And so it becomes very, very difficult to stand up a competitor, right? And that is an example of network effects, right? The more people you have on the platform that are using it, the more value it creates for the other people that are on the platform. And that's really hard to disrupt. So you're looking for things like that. What would give this company an unfair advantage over others? Now, sometimes it's like, hey, we have exclusive access to certain customers, or we have a certain amount of expertise and we have patents. There are a lot of sources of unfair advantages, and we'll talk about that more as part of the training as we go through this in subsequent weeks. But you want to look for something like that. What makes them unique? What makes them special? What gives them something unfair? And then the last is, even if you have all of those other things, you still have to invest in a company where you can get liquidity, right? You can get paid back in the next 5 to 10 years, either by being acquired by another company or by going public. And the interesting thing there is, look, there are so many great businesses out there. In fact, 97%, somewhere in that range, of companies never raise venture money. That doesn't mean that they're bad businesses. They're great businesses. But one of the biggest reasons that they don't is because they don't have this ability to go public or get acquired in 5 to 10 years. And this gets back to, like, you need these things to grow super fast and get really big in a short time period. And that's where things like being a monopoly really helps, because if you're a monopoly, you can charge more, which means you can generate bigger profits, and those bigger profits can be invested into growth, which allows you to just grow faster, right? The reason why you have to create liquidity in 5 to 10 years is because you are investing other people's money. And those other people, they're not going to wait around for 50 years for your company to finally get there, right? They want their money back relatively soon, right? They're already locking it up for 10 years, which is a long time. And so you have to be able to make your investment and exit your investment, right? Sell it in that 10-year time period, which is the length of your fund. So almost all funds operate for about 10 years. And that's kind of life. They got to make all their investments, and they got to return all of the capital that they invested to investors in a 10-year time period. So you have this relatively like condensed time period where you've got to invest in great companies, help them grow really fast, get really big, exit them through an IPO or acquisition, and then return the cash back to investors so that you can do it all over again in your next fund. All right, so how are venture funds structured? VC funds are small partnerships. They really got their start in the early days. It was just a bunch of executives, and they got together and they were like, hey, I've got a little bit of money. Let's pool our money together and make investments in small companies, right, that we believe in. That's how it really got started. And then what happened is those initial clubs, if you will, of investors, I mean, they were writing really small checks, but they started to see some success in the companies that they were investing in. And so those companies would be successful and they would generate profits. And then their friends would see it and say, hey, that's really cool. I want to invest. And so, but I don't have time to like, find the deals or do the due diligence or anything. Can I just give you money and you invest on my behalf? And so that's really how venture funds really got started, is they started pulling in all this outside capital, right? And that just got bigger and bigger and bigger. But at its core, it's always been this like group of individuals that come together. They raise a fund from outside investors, and then they go around and they try to identify great companies and invest in them. What typically happens then is each partner, every fund's a little bit different, but generally they all fit the same mold. And that is that each partner will go out and find and lead an investment in a company that's kind of all their own, right? And so when you hear like Sequoia just invested in XYZ company, what's actually happening is there's a partner at Sequoia who went out and she found some amazing deal. She convinced the entrepreneurs to take their money, negotiated all the terms, et cetera, et cetera. And then she brought it back to her partners and said, hey, this is a really compelling investment opportunity. Here's all the due diligence that I've done. Here's why I'm really excited about it. I think we should invest. And she convinces her other partners to all go in together and make that investment out of their fund. That partnership, right, is an investment committee. And so sometimes she's pitching to the investment committee, and sometimes she's on the investment committee when other partners pitch to her. So our goal with this is to try to replicate that. And so your investment committee will be the judges at the final event. Your job is to convince them that you found a great deal, you've done your diligence, and it will generate a great return. All right, so as long as you can find reliable data, you can source your deal from wherever you like. But we don't make any promises around confidentiality to the entrepreneurs. So you need to be upfront with them about that, which is going to make it a little bit tricky. But I'll tell you this, every year teams identify amazing companies, and they're able to convince the founder to give them access to at least a little bit of proprietary data or financial data that they can use as part of their due diligence to win. But look, you're not restricted to just that. So if you're worried like, oh man, how am I going to find like a great company and convince the entrepreneur to give me access to their financials? That sounds too hard. Fortunately, there are lots of other great sources of publicly available data that's out there. I'm going to answer that question about NDAs in just a second. So all these different platforms are equity crowdfunding sites, and pretty much all of them provide a decent level of financial data that you can use as part of your due diligence. And I'll tell you, the quality of companies that are launching on these platforms just keeps getting better and better and better. There are definitely companies that have raised on these platforms historically that are now billion-dollar companies. So there's really kind of no excuse. If you can go through and you can find a great deal on one of these platforms and convince the judges it's a great deal, that's totally acceptable. The ones I would probably focus on this list are Start Engine, WeFunder, and Republic. Those are the top 3 platforms in the space. I would say WeFunder is a little bit of a Wild West. They've got some of the very best deals, and they've got some of the more interesting type deals out there. But they've got like, they're just really scrappy and very supportive of their entrepreneurs, and they do a great job sourcing all kinds of stuff. On the other spectrum of that is Republic, and Republic is a lot more kind of buttoned down, Silicon Valley pedigree, if you will, with a definite angle or bend towards supporting companies with a diversity angle, right? So women and Black and brown founders and so on and so forth, which is great. So, and there's some amazing companies on that platform, but they're a lot more picky about the types of companies that they allow on their platform, whereas WeFunder is a little bit more of a free-for-all. They do some due diligence and they do call out a little bit, but not to the extent of Republic. And then Seed Invest, it's somewhere in between the two. So just to give you some guidance there. Some other ones worth thinking about, like Circle Up, they do a lot of consumer products companies. AngelList does a lot of amazing companies. The challenge with those is that you have to be an accredited investor to get access to those opportunities. And so finding companies on that platform might pose to be a little bit more challenging. But they have some amazing deals. For example, on AngelList, I remember when Calm, some of you may be familiar with the app Calm, launched on AngelList, and today is valued at over $1 billion. So really interesting opportunities get funded on AngelList all the time. So if you can figure out a way to tap into that can be another great source. And then I would recommend reaching out to the companies, right? So you have a couple of things that are in your favor. One, you're a student, and everybody loves to help students. So you can reach out to entrepreneurs and say, hey, I'm a student, I'm doing this competition. We're tasked with finding a company to pitch to a bunch of venture capitalists. And I think your company's super interesting. Would you be willing to hop on a call and just chat about it? And I think you'll be surprised by how often entrepreneurs are willing to engage with you. And you can kind of hold out that carrot of like, hey, this is going to get pitched to some really good venture investors. So there's, I'm helping kind of you build your brand and get your name out there. In terms of NDAs, so NDAs aren't standard for this competition because we post everything online, and we're trying to make this as open and inclusive as possible. So I can't, in order for that to work, I would have to have everybody under NDA, and I wouldn't be able to share the videos, and especially with people that maybe they just want to watch the videos and learn something. They don't necessarily want to compete. So that's the big reason. But I will say, most entrepreneurs that are inexperienced stress out all the time about confidentiality, but really it's not your idea. It's not like your financial performance that's going to determine if you win or lose. It's your ability to execute. And so really great founders that I've met over time, they don't care. They're like, tell the world, we don't care. We like to be really transparent, because we're doing something nobody else can touch, and we're super excited about it. We're taking this thing to the moon, right? Let's see, the other question, what is the value proposition to founders get sharing this data? Will the competition benefit them in terms of funding? So the big thing, like I said, is being able to pitch to, or have your company pitch to venture capitalists who are part of the judges. So that's probably the biggest carrot. But I think you'll be surprised if you engage with entrepreneurs and you kind of pitch them on hey, I'm a student, I'm trying to learn, help me learn, that they'll engage with you. And look, the other thing is you don't need a full set of financials or anything like that. You need some like high level diligence related financial performance things that you can look at. So it's not uncommon for entrepreneurs to share those data points all the time anyways. Like I get emails all the time from entrepreneurs that are seeking funding that are like, hey, we just achieved like, 2 million in ARR, annual recurring revenue, right? And we're raising our seed round. Would you be interested in chatting, right? And you could ask them some other questions around like how often do their customers churn and maybe some other data points like that, and you can kind of triangulate on some of the information you need. So what if the company is already part of a VC or is being bought by a VC? So VCs typically don't buy companies. That would be more of a private equity firm. If a venture capitalist has invested in a company, that's fine. You can invest in companies where a VC is an investor. Ideally, you would want to invest alongside that VC. So that could actually be a perfect example or a type of company to go after. All right, so just a reminder, our next workshop is going to be March 3rd and from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Assignments are to remember to submit your team members and team name by March 6th. So you can sign up through our website for that. Only one of you needs to sign up your team. So we don't need each person to submit a team. And if you have any questions or any issues, feel free to email vccc@ugrowthfund.com. Put that in the chat right here. And we will respond and get back to you. If, for example, you submit your team and then you realize that you want to add or subtract somebody off the team, just email us and we can take care of that. And then I would say start looking for your top 3 companies. So your next deliverable after that is March 13th. We're going to have you submit 3 companies that you're excited about. These doesn't mean that these are the 3, that one of them has to be a company that you're going to start doing your diligence on necessarily, but what we want is to get you guys moving on finding interesting deals. And we'd like you to identify at least 3 companies so that if, one of the companies, and you find out as part of due diligence that one of the companies is not going to work, right? Like maybe you find out the CEO has been, convicted of fraud, right? And you're like, I don't know that I want to back that guy or that woman, right? Then you've got at least 2 other companies as backups that you can turn to. So I'm going to try and post the recording tomorrow morning. So if you want, you can watch the recording that was done for the Utah competition. That's on our website as well. Clearly, like the dates are going to be a little different, but the content is exactly the same. So, but yeah, we'll get this posted to the competition page tomorrow. What other questions do people have? Feel free to throw them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll answer them. Yes, Miguel.
Yeah, quick question, and thank you for this. You had mentioned the carrot that we could potentially waive for founders is the opportunity to get some exposure to some venture capitalists during the competition. Do you have access to those names to give this carrot more of to strengthen that carrot and say, hey, these are some of the VC funds that have previously been there. We think we may see some of these type of funds or examples of funds.
Yeah. So we are finalizing our judges, but I'll tell you right now, one of them is Rodney Sampson with OHub, and he also runs a fund called 100 Allies and Angels, or Angels and Allies. And then the other is an individual named Paris Boyd. He's a graduate of Clark Atlanta. Great guy. He works at a firm called Firmament, and they manage about $700 million. And then the third is we are going to get somebody from the Fearless Fund there in Atlanta. We're just waiting to find out who, one of the 3 general partners there. And then we have an invite out to a couple other people that we're super excited about, but haven't confirmed them yet. But as soon as they get confirmed, we will let you know.
Thank you.
Yep. What other questions? Okay, so if you have questions, feel free to, yes, Guy?
Yeah, my name's Sky Decatur. I go to Morehouse. I just have a quick question about what are some past companies that like your past year winners talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's do this. Is Christy on the line?
Yep.
So Christy is now part of our fund, but before she joined our firm, she was on the winning team in Utah. Do you want to tell them about your company and maybe some of the other companies that we've seen?
Yeah, so I pitched this company called Pursuit, and they're a legal tech company. My team and I are law students with pretty much no prior experience in venture or really finance or business. And so we attended this competition, did a training, and pitched this legal tech company. And we had an advantage because we really knew about the market and how the product will help. And so that's one of the companies.
And then last semester in Utah, we did this competition, and one of the teams that won did a company called, I think it was called Techuity. And it's a platform that makes it really easy to build a mobile app without any programming experience. Pretty interesting business. One of the other people that placed in the top 3 did a company called Narrative. And what Narrative does is it's a marketplace for data. So let's pretend like you have a company that collects data just as part of the course of doing business, right? Like an e-commerce website, right? And you're collecting a bunch of data on your customers, like what they buy and where they live and what kind of devices they have. You can take that data and you can sell it. You can put it on the marketplace and sell it anonymized to other buyers that would maybe want it for something else. And you can also buy data on the marketplace to use it for your own analytics and so forth. So that was that company. Trying to think some of the others. We had a company that was pitched where they have a mobile phone that's made for kids. So it looks really cool, like a smartphone, but they kind of block all of the apps and so forth, so that kids can't go on and look at stuff that's inappropriate, or they can't, spend a lot of money or get themselves in trouble on social media, those kinds of things. Company called Gab Wireless. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of stuff that's out there. And so I wouldn't worry so much about like what the company does as much as like, can you build a compelling case for why it's a good investment, right? So med device, pharma, tech, consumer products. I think all of those things are on the table. So.
I had a quick question. I know that there are different industries and different websites online in which we can kind of search for these companies. My question specific is, are we like limiting to these private companies, and is there like a certain place that you recommend we kind of search for these companies, or is it just like based on our team in which we try to cast a wider net to see where we can kind of find these places and value it ourselves?
Yeah, so it needs to be a privately held company. It can't be a publicly traded company, right? And ideally, it's a small startup, like, they're not thousands of employees. And then I just went over on the presentation a bunch of places you can go to start looking. But just to review those, that would be like republic.co, wefunder.com, and startengine.com are all great places where they have hundreds of startups that are currently raising venture capital or raising money right now. In fact, you can invest if you want in those companies for as little as like $250. But there are some great companies on there. And so you can go and find a lot of interesting businesses there, and they post a lot of information, financial performance metrics, everything you need is there. But if you don't want to go through that route and you want to be a little more entrepreneurial and find your own deal, that's totally acceptable too. And in that case, you're probably going to just leverage your own networks and relationships, and look on places like TechCrunch and VentureBeat to see who's getting funding and what companies you think are interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about deal sourcing next week in more depth too. So
All right, that's perfect, because that's what I was thinking. There's a lot of networks here. I'm from Atlanta, and
yeah,
there's like networks here with like startup companies, especially in like fintech sector. So it'll be interesting to kind of explore those as well. But thank you very much.
yeah, absolutely. These are great questions. What other questions do people have?
So just to be clear, you only have to be a student at an Atlanta college, correct?
That's right. Yep. Yep. And just so you know, we're running these competitions. We're running the same competition in San Diego as well, with its own prize money there. So those videos are also posted online. So anyways, and we hold those Thursday evenings. So if you miss this one and Thursday works better for you, you're welcome to participate. Great question about UGA. We are allowing students from UGA to compete this year. We're not sure about next year, but take advantage of it this year because we're opening it up.
Hey, Peter, thank you for the insightful presentation. My name is Evan. I'm a grad student here at GSU. A quick question for you. Is this all completely virtual this year?
Yeah, sadly, it's all totally virtual thanks to COVID. Sorry to force you through another Zoom. Our goal is next year to be in person, and yeah, so.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, if you do not have a team, I see a bunch of people here that would love to be on a team. Here's what I'm going to suggest. You've got two options. So the first option is I'm going to create a bunch of breakout rooms and just open them up. And I'll probably do it based on school to start, because at least that gives you some information. So I'll just name the breakout rooms after the schools. So feel free to hop in that, meet other people. Or if you don't really want to do that route, totally fine. Just shoot us an email at vccc@ugrowthfund.com, and we will assign you a team, ideally with other people from your school that you can work with as well. So yeah, and as Christy said, if you register, you can just say, hey, I'm still looking for a team, and we'll get you on a team ASAP. And for those of you that are like, can I still win if I'm on a team that got assembled? Yeah, we have students that are teams that place every year we've done this, where we helped assemble the team instead of them coming with a team already prepared, and they've placed and won money. So it just comes down to if you guys are willing to put in the time and the effort. We're here to provide the support and the training and the mentorship to get you there. So
what are some unsuccessful habits that you saw from unsuccessful pitches?
So that's a great question. I think things that really differentiate people that win and those that don't. One is the level of depth that they went into in their due diligence, right? So did they just kind of find a quick research report that said the market was $1 billion and call it good? Or did they actually spend some time maybe talking to customers and really understanding who the customer is and trying to figure out how many of those customers there are, those kinds of things, right? Did they say, oh, I just couldn't find financials and the entrepreneur wouldn't give them, so I just didn't do anything there, right? I just gave up, right? Or, this competition is very similar to how we recruit. And like if, let's say you're looking at a shoe company, right? Well, maybe the entrepreneur won't give you their financials, but like you could call all the different companies that sell their shoes and ask them about how well those shoes sell, right? And you could get all of this like really interesting information, right, about those shoe sales, for example, right? So it's kind of like hustling a little bit and going a little bit the extra mile. So that's one. And I think the other one is the other big one is not being able to really explain why you think it's a great investment, right? Like hitting all the things we talked about earlier, like why is the management team the right management team, and why is this product like so interesting and exciting, and what makes them unique relative to the other competition. Yeah, I think sometimes students kind of treat this like a homework assignment, right? And they just like throw some stats on the page and submit it, versus like really like thinking critically, like what makes this exciting, right? Like why would I want to invest my own money in this deal, right?